Just want to start. How many people own the Qs? Oh, you could sell some people here, Ryan. Okay. We are going to basically highlight the Qs. Okay, so I just want to start and explain the NASDAQ 100. I work on a team with ETF analysts. We nerd out on all kinds of issues. We are just so fascinated by this index and the ETF, obviously, that tracks it. It's a weird index. We kind of call it the eighth wonder of the world. It captures the U.S. stock market in a special way. Do you know that it's doubled the performance of the S&P 500 since it launched in '99? I mean, and the S&P is a really good index, right? So what's going on here? I want to really explore what is happening inside this index and why it's sort of become, doesn't get as much flows as SPY and the other ETFs, but it's close. And I just think it's an interesting ETF. Obviously, the performance has to make it pretty easy to market this ETF, right?
It does.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, it's the fifth largest in the world. It's the second most actively traded. I mean, the pretty robust derivatives market around it, whether that be QQQ, some of our other NASDAQ 100 strategies, or just the index in and of itself, right? A lot of derivatives that are tied to it. So there's just a lot of notoriety, and the fact that it's been around for 26 years, like a lot of people have crossed its path. So.
Ready for another fun fact? Actually, I'll turn this into a trivia question. You guys are financial nerds. Maybe somebody here, this is a tough one. This is like Jeopardy level 1000, okay? In the past 15 years, only one active fund has beaten the Qs out of thousands. I mean, we did a study. My colleague David Cohn did it. Only one person. Can anybody name the fund or the person? I'll take either. Yeah. Yes, Barron. This guy, Ron Barron. Okay, do you know how he beat it? Yeah, his fund's 50% Tesla, okay? Which is kind of, it's not legal to just put 50%, but he got it small and just let it run. And so the only thing you could do to have beaten the Qs was just buy a ton of Tesla. That's how hard it was to beat. What is the NASDAQ 100? I mean, it's not really beta. It's not totally tech. What's going on? Like, how would you describe it?
You're right, but I wouldn't go as far to say that it's like a factor ETF, right? I mean, it's beta-like. It's comprised of the 100 largest companies that are listed on the NASDAQ exchange, ex-financials. So what you wind up getting is this sort of like growth leaning, just when you're looking at the sector breakdown. You know, you're getting some tech names in there, you're getting some discretionary, some telecom, but you have these sort of like, of course, Mag 7, these kind of growth-oriented leaders of the past 10, 15, 20, 25 years that have all gravitated to this exchange and then by extension this index. So it's this sort of like growth leaning product that is beta-like is probably the best way that I can describe it, because there really isn't anything like it out there in the market.
Okay, can I give you my theory?
Yeah,
okay.
Shoot.
This is just a theory. I think this index really started, it's similar to Nike and Michael Jordan. Steve Jobs decided to list there in 1980 when he was like 25 years old. I mean, NASDAQ was not that big. He went there instead of the New York Stock Exchange where IBM was listed, probably because he wanted to be different than IBM. And I just think people who are creators and founders and visionaries, they really love Steve Jobs, similar to the way basketball players would like Michael Jordan. And he kind of, you know, Michael Jordan went to Nike when it was the third sneaker after Adidas and Converse. And I find a parallel there. Steve Jobs chose it. And then when Steve Jobs Part 2 came in the 2000s, game over. Every single, it was like it became cool to go there if you're in this sort of tech visionary world. Is that, what do you think of my theory?
I think you're spot on, right? Yeah, Steve Jobs was probably the first. I mean, you can make the argument that Intel in the 70s, but I don't think Intel was as cool as Steve Jobs, right? Like he was kind of a tech rebel. And then I think as success started to come to companies like Microsoft and Apple and Intel, like you started to see the early 2000s, which you referenced, right? You started to see the Amazons in the late 90s. You started to see the then Googles, now Alphabets, the NVIDIAs long before it was NVIDIA. The Teslas, and it's almost like, you know, a snowball effect where if I'm an up-and-coming kind of like tech or technologically oriented CEO, right, and it's, hey, you could be listing where Apple and Alphabet and Amazon do, or you can go somewhere else and, you know, be sort of like a large cap value, almost like a stodgy feel. I think most of them would say, wow, like I could be in the same kind of realm of Apple and Amazon. I want to go that way. And, I think we've seen that kind of perpetuate. I mean, the NASDAQ has won more listings than the New York Stock Exchange now for, I think it's 40 plus quarters.
Wow.
So, they continue to sort of attract that sort of that sort of company. And I think it was all based on the fact that it was the first electronic exchange, and Steve Jobs said, all right, this is where I'm going.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the person who fielded that call. I've been digging hard. If anybody knows, let me know. I think it would make a great little mini documentary for my podcast. But anyway, I digress. So one interesting thing is research and development. When we think about these tech-oriented companies, a lot of what I think, we just talked about this recently with Steve Howe in our index group about research and development here versus other regions. It's so strong in the United States, and that is somewhat of our secret sauce. Yeah. Can you talk about the amount of R&D and patents that are embedded in the index?
Yeah, it's pervasive, and like from our perspective, right? Like this is one of our few funds at Invesco that isn't necessarily like factor driven or smart beta, right? So it is, I don't want to say purely passive, but it has a passive feel to it. So it's almost, we need to like reverse engineer the story where it's, okay, well, what has made this very small subset in terms of number of companies so successful? And so, the notion of innovation, the ability to change, and you look at kind of what companies have had the staying power over the past 25 years. And a common thread that we found was the fact that they spend more on R&D than their peers. In our last observation period, on a weighted average basis, I think it was 15.6 billion. S&P x NASDAQ 100, it was 1.5 billion. So an order of magnitude of 10x. And then, as a percentage of sales, over 11% of sales reinvested back in R&D. So like that's a very long-term and significant commitment that these companies are making. And then you kind of take it a step further, you peel the onion back one more layer, and we start analyzing patents across all these different disruptive technologies. And again, this like rather small subset, small in number, 100 companies, file a staggering percentage of patents globally for things like cloud, of course, cybersecurity, but things like speech recognition, image recognition, NLP. I mean, the last observation period, it was over 45% of every patent that related to NLP was filed by NASDAQ 100 constituents. So I think like the IP has become such an important part of not only the index, but under the hood, almost every individual company's growth strategy, that it's always front of mind for them, and that's become sort of a hallmark of them for the past, 1-2 decades. So it's something that is in their in the front of their minds. And I was just on a panel with some of these companies out at Consumer Electronics Show, and each one of them was 25% or more of revenue reinvested back in through R&D. All talking about human capital, attracting top talent. And again, it's one of those things where it sort of feeds itself. They are able to solve these kind of complex client problems, and in doing so, they develop and start to retain IP.
And one of the things people will say, well, it's all Mag 7. I mean, I think it's all close to half of the index now is Mag 7, maybe 42%, something like that. S&P also getting full of Mag 7, but this journalist Sam Rowe on X one time pointed something out that just changed my way to view this, which is that these Mag 7 companies are like 4 or 5 what could be other companies inside of them, right? They all own a lot. And I think if you look at them as the Mag 35 or the Mag 40, it makes you a little less paranoid about, we've got this concentration risk. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think these companies have spent a lot of time, money, and effort to diversify their business lines. I mean, you can make an argument that a lot of these companies could fit in multiple sector boxes. So without a doubt, I think like diversifying the revenue streams and basically the underlying components that make up the whole, I think that does help to address the concentration issue a little bit. And
we have only in 30 seconds, just give me one stock that isn't one of the more famous ones that has stuck out to you in the past couple months that is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think performance-wise, it would be a company like Netflix. I mean, Starbucks was interesting, with their turnaround and their new CEO. But I mean, something that people wouldn't expect would probably be something like IDEX Labs. So a mainly veterinary company. I mean, I don't think most people hear QQQ and they think, oh, I'm going to look at healthcare, but names like IDEX or Intuitive Surgical, there's a couple of biotech names in there as well. I mean, there is some exposure to healthcare, and I think people learning that IDEX Labs is in the NASDAQ 100 would probably raise a couple of eyebrows.
That's a good one. I didn't know that. All right, well, we're up. Our time is up, and I want to thank Ryan here for a great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eric. Appreciate it.